Today on Women in Wild Places, I'm talking with someone whose story I've been so excited to share with you. Alpinist, adaptive athlete, kindergarten teacher, stepmom, and an all around powerhouse human, Kimberly Cross. Kimber grew up in Washington State, spending long days fishing with her dad, eating donuts before dawn, and learning early what it meant to live off the land. She was born with one hand, and for a long time that meant hiding, tucking her hand into pockets, behind binders, and out of photos, until a few key mentors and moments of representation changed everything. In this conversation, we get into how she went from fast pitching inspired by Jim Abbott to late 20s basic alpine student to ice climber and then alpinist climbing with a custom prosthetic tool. We talk about the phrase that shapes her life can't, will, did, the mentors who opened doors for her, what it really looks like to balance a three-in-one life as a teacher, athlete, and public speaker, and how she's approaching a third attempt on ham and eggs on the Moose's Tooth in the Alaska Range. We also dig into representation in the outdoors, unconscious bias, what her kindergarten hot seat looks like when she brings pro athletes into her classroom, and the difference between simply inspiring people and actually provoking them into action. I'm your host, Gabriella, and this is Women in Wild Places, stories of women who find strength, clarity, and identity in the outdoors. Now let's get into my conversation with Kimber. Welcome, Kimber Cross. I have been following your journey for some time, and not only are you an amazing athlete in the mountains, you're also kindergarten teacher, you're a wife, you have stepchildren, you do it all, and I'm just so excited to hear more about your goals, your life, how you approach objectives, your thought process behind mentorship. Thank you for being on today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk about all the things near and dear to my heart.
So you're in Washington State.
Yep. Yep.
Were you born and raised?
Yeah, I was born and raised in a little town, kind of Spanaway, Yelm. Locals will know those names, but I say Greater Tacoma area, and then the farther out of Washington I get, I just say Seattle, and that makes sense for. But yeah, born and raised.
What was that like? What was little Kimber like?
Uh, I was really into, like, fishing with my dad. Earliest, like, memories with my dad are waking up 4 AM, getting pulled out of bed, and he would make incredible oatmeal from scratch, like, in the mornings. We'd get oatmeal, I would get a cup of hot chocolate that he would make, we'd get in the car, and we would drive to Frank's Donuts. The second it would open up, I would get my favorite old-fashioned donut or chocolate with sprinkles, and we'd go fishing, and that is such a fun memory I have. It was constant. So on the water, ocean fishing to river fishing on the Columbia. And as I got a little bit older, hunting, I got my disabled hunter's license and am able to use a crossbow out here. And so I really knew the outdoors via those two aspects. They had a little bit of a land, and so there's garden and orchard and raising cows. So the outdoors for me was like you use the outdoors for sustenance. It
Mm.
gives you food, it gives you an experience with your family, it connects you to nature. But climbing and experiencing the outdoors in that way would not happen for a couple more decades.
But that's a really deep relationship to start out with,
Yeah,
waking
yeah,
up
you really.
early, spending all day, and doing it with your family.
Yeah, yeah. I was a full on East kid. So it was outside until dark. We didn't have internet or social media for a lot of my childhood. And so it was just outside playing in the neighborhood, or in the summers would grab my cereal bowl, walk to the backyard, throw blueberries in there. And then if I was hungry during the day, I'm just going to the orchard, going through the garden, grabbing tomatoes, filling a bowl up of vegetables for my mom to make a salad, and my
Mm,
dad to cook up some fish. We were definitely a kind of this blue collar family, a little family of four, loving using land, like I said,
mm,
was deeply ingrained in me, and,
yeah.
just respecting the land and living off of it. And I'm just so grateful. I now have a tiny backyard and a little plot where I can grow tomatoes and raspberries, and that's about all I can grow with the little of sun that I get. But I love being outside, and it's therapeutic and refreshing. And Yeah.
It sounds like a Disney movie almost, growing up that way.
Yeah. And my pets were our cows, and they provided dinner for the rest of the year after we raised them.
It's a great way, actually, to introduce that to kids so that you understand where your food comes from and
Yeah.
all of the work that goes into it, and that you respect the life of what you're eating because you know what goes into catching it. I think that's really important for kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really fun to even share that with my kindergartners, and there's different units of curriculum where we talk about things that grow, and it's really fun to hear some of them share, like, I go fishing with my dad, or we have a garden, or when you go grocery shopping, like, where is that orange, where did it originate from, and we get to talk about where it grows, who picks it, how it gets shipped to the store, how you pick it, how now it's in the classroom, and it's fun to kind of take them on that journey and then share what I did and what they could possibly do. And it's such a human experience, and um, yeah, an act of work and gratitude kind of all mixed in.
So little Kimber was outside constantly. It was just normalized part of your life. So how did that evolve over time as you got
Yeah.
older?
As I got older, I think about that representation piece. Like, what was I seeing in media? We're this day and age, it's media is constantly around us, and we're constantly get fed what we should be interested, what we should look at, what people are doing that look like us, and that's a really big part of how our society operates now. But back in the day, it was athletics was a big thing, and seeing baseball or football, and I did all the sports. I loved it, and I learned, being born with one hand, my right hand, the fingers stopped growing in utero, and so when I was born, my, parents were like, "Oh my goodness, she has one hand," but they had a bunch of implications my mom did with tumors and Cushing's disease, and so they, getting married, never even thought they were gonna have kids. She had thyroid issues and everything, so I was kind of a honeymoon surprise baby, and they were just so happy to have a baby, and, I was healthy throughout the whole pregnancy, and then being born is when they were like, "Whoa, she has one hand," and even though I had a dad that was heavily into sports, that's how he grew up, and that the outdoors for fishing, and then, sports, and so that was really my big influence is, the outdoors, and then getting into basketball and fast pitch, and my mom was
Mm,
so much like, you know, how do you perceive yourself? Like, are you confident? Like, are almost in like kind of a worrying motherly way where my dad was like, yes, you will be the best one out there. You can do this. And so kind of the dichotomy of both parents and their perspectives and how they felt was the right way to encourage me. And so, my mom found Jim Abbott. He was a pitcher in the 90s, and he had pitched for the California Angels, and he was born with one hand, but he was a pitcher. And so he would pitch and then have his glove under his arm that had, the stump, for lack of a better term, and he'd pitch it, then his other hand with the fingers would move into the glove, and boom, he'd be ready to catch it. And
mm,
so for my parents, they were like, "There's your representation. Someone that looks like you and is doing sports and is
mm.
famous, for lack of a better term, as a well-known athlete." So I pitched for 9 years. I grew up and
Wow.
I was like, "Well, that's what I can do because that person with one hand does it.
Mhm.
So there's my sport. I'll do that." And I had a coach that would come up from Texas, and all through elementary, junior high, high school, I pitched. My identity was pitching. And that was really the first time I needed a glove, a tool that was modified. And so we had
Mm.
friends that had horses and industrial strength sewing machines that they had sewed the wrist of that mitt tighter, added some extra padding. And you're always taught in, grade school, catch with two hands, close the glove. And I would have to do that. But the way, a female pitches, fast pitch, we kind of come around, and there's just not enough time for me to have pitched the ball and then change my complete rotation of body to get into the glove before maybe I would have a ball flying straight at my face. And
Yeah.
so having a glove on my non-finger hand was kind of the best method. And so that was really what I found my whole world about until college. And then it became all about the world of education and being with kids. And I loved kids. And that kind of turned into what I did all through my and I took a little bit of time to do my master's and teach in Kansas City. It was like the PNW rain is awful, the drizzle, cloudy. Let me go to Kansas City because they have different weather. And then whew, the tornadoes and the hailstorms. I was like, hail no. I'll take that rain. Why was I complaining? So I moved back in my mid to later 20s, and in about 2029 is a friend was like, "Hey, there's this course now that you're back here and we've gone on some hikes and hiking was a new thing. I don't know why we weren't a family that hiked growing up. It was just fishing and hunting. But she was like, there's a course that's for people that want to climb Rainier. Do you want to do that? And we had been going through that era of life, have heartache and heartbreak and who are we as women in our later 20s and what does the future hold? And so she signed up for this basic alpine course through the Mountaineers out here. And I was like, well, I sign up for it too. Why not? Let's go learn how to hike up Mount Rainier, which let me tell you, you hike for, a couple miles and then it quickly changes from the sphere of hiking into the sphere of climbing and
Yeah.
glacier travel. And just to experience that as I dip into my 30s was just a whole new world.
Mm.
And for the past decade, it's definitely just changed the entire trajectory of where I thought my life would go, where I thought I belonged as a person, as a female with one hand. It's been, I would say, life changing.
Yeah. So you start out and you live so many years of your life doing pitching based
Yeah.
off of this person that you had seen that you related to because of their circumstance. Did you have anybody like that in alpinism?
I hadn't seen anyone like that, nor was there really any platform yet that super highlighted, you know, adaptive athletes or
Mhm.
disabled people. This was obviously pre 2020. I signed up in like 2015, 16 in the course.
Mhm.
I think in the next couple of years, like the Seahawks, Seattle Seahawks NFL had a player that had one hand and was playing, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's someone else. And then as I got into the intermediate alpine course, I quickly realized after the basic course and climbing an
You
entire
loved it.
summer, I was like, I love this and somehow am surviving each climb and I'm loving it and growing in my skills. And I want to take the intermediate course where you're learning how
Mhm.
to lead on trad, you're learning how to lead
Mhm.
glacier climbs, but you're learning how to ice climb. And it was the
Mhm.
ice climbing where I was like, oh, you definitely need to hold on to two tools when you do that. So that may be where my barrier is. Like, that's I don't know what exists. When I was 5 or 6, I have vague memories of my parents taking me to this hospital that built prosthetics, and they thought, "Well, maybe she needs a prosthetic for piano or for picking things up." They wanted to make space for me to figure out if I wanted modifications and adaptive technologies in that day and age in the 90s, but everything was just kind of a hindrance where I was like, "Nah, I don't wanna relearn how to play the piano. I know how to play the piano," and,
Mhm.
man, I was so good at that theme song, the chorus to the Titanic theme song, and playing it, my little, nubs are but I was like, "I don't like any of this," and I just kind of veered away from, "Don't consider me disabled, don't put me in a group full of other disabled people, don't
Mhm.
try to give me things." My parents were like, "This is so interesting. She just doesn't want to be seen as
Mhm.
who she is," and I grew up a lot of my life hiding my hand in my pocket
Mm.
at school, walking around, my binder was covering my hand. I did all
Mhm.
the sports, like, it was no secret. I definitely used 2
Mhm.
hands dribbling a ball, and I
Mhm.
did them well, and so it's not like it was a surprise, but I was still so good at hiding it.
Yeah.
First best friend, she turned around in 10th grade. We had, English class, and she's like, "You have 1 hand! I've known you for 2 months!" And my first boyfriend, my 11th grade year, I didn't know for the first 4 days and called and was like, "My sister said you had 1 hand. Like, we've been dating for 4 days, and I, pursued you for 2 weeks. There's no way." And I'm like, "Oh,
You're like, "Well,
yeah."
check this
So
out."
check this out. She's right. I do. But then I realized, wow, I truly am so good at hiding my hand.
Mm,
Why am I doing that? I was
yeah.
so consumed with the opinion of others. The lack of representation in society made me feel like this has to be hidden. The only time I do see
Mhm.
a limb difference is when you're like a villain in a Disney
Mm.
movie, and so I was just conditioned to, I don't want any prosthetic to make me look even weirder. I don't even want the plastic hand that you have to put on because it doesn't look real enough, even if you paint the
Mhm.
nails. I will just hide, and I
Yeah.
hid, and I hid, and I hid, and I think of what these courses, the position they put me in, not only
Mhm.
pitching, and obviously I'm growing in my athleticism and my confidence, but these alpine courses, day one of the instructors was like, "Hey, the committee, once we found out you had one hand, they're not sure that you can be a part of this."
That's what I was
Which,
gonna
when
ask you.
yeah, and at first I was like, "Wait, why not?" When you think about belaying, rappelling, setting anchors, swinging
And it's
leads, like,
extra work for them as instructors to learn for themselves a new skill of how to teach something in a different way,
yeah,
to think
exactly.
creatively about how to create a situation that will help you thrive in that environment.
Yeah, and, your lives are tied to each other when you're
Mhm.
rock climbing, glacier climbing, so safety is a real question. I would never be like, "How
Mhm.
dare you question? Of course I can do it." Like, that's ableist, but at the same time, are you coming from that deficit mindset of, like,
Mhm.
"Can you do this?" That's deficit thinking to,
Yeah.
like, "How do you do this?"
How can we figure this
And
out?
yeah, and I'm so grateful for, Scott Sichel. He was, you know, former Army Ranger, a vet, was aware. Prosthetics, obviously, people coming out of the military, who are losing their limbs, from, being on the front lines, like, that's a reality. They learn to walk again. They learn to,
Yeah.
use their hands again with prosthetics. And so he was so aware of that world and so aware of needing adaptations and modifications. And his mindset was, I'll be honest with you, this is what the committee is thinking, safety, and how are you safe? How are other people safe? But you don't get a free ride and you don't get to get kicked out. You get to learn for yourself what works.
Mhm.
You teach us, and I believe in you. And the fact that this man would, without even realizing, be an ally, be someone that's like, we've never had this. We've never had a person with a disability, missing a hand, take our climbing class.
Mm.
It's going to get figured out. That was over a decade ago. And you look now at representation and you're like, I can't fathom that ever being a conversation. How offensive. But truly, we've made leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. But this was prior to just seeing visually who's climbing. And so when it came time for the ice climbing portion, that same man held up a picture and he's like, "Have you heard of this woman, Maureen Beck?" And there's a film that had come out, I think Stumped is what it was called, with the Real Rock series, and she
Mhm.
had just climbed a 512-ish something, I have to look back at it, like a big climb, especially for a person with one, it was her project, she finished it. It was incredible just to see that she's breaking the boundaries of what you thought a person with one hand could climb. And she's incredible at sport climbing and trad. And so he had seen a picture of her with a prosthetic. Back in the day, she had a prosthetic with ice. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, there's a person. Here's the picture." And all I needed was to see a picture of a person
Kudos to
one hand like
Scott
me. Kudos to Scott.
for bringing that to you and encouraging you with real evidence just to
Yeah.
give you that feeling of, "Yes, I can do this."
Yeah, like, sometimes we just need to see forerunners in our life, and Maureen has truly been a forerunner for a lot of
Mhm.
the adaptive community. Adaptive athlete or an athlete with a disability or, just whatever you want to describe our lived experience. She was a forerunner, and
Mm.
she just living her own journey, pursuing her own passions. When that came into my world where I was like, this person exists. This person is climbing for North Face. This person is accomplishing mega routes. And this
Mhm.
person ice climbed before and had a prosthetic. It just was that light bulb moment of, at first, I can't do this. And then I see her, I'm like, "Oh, I will do this." And
Mm.
then it took maybe a year and a half, almost 2 years of working with a prosthetic doctor out in Washington. Once they heard my name and my story, they asked to meet. and they said, "I build prosthetics for athletes. What's ice climbing? I wanna build you one." And that's definitely not something insurance covers because sharp objects and putting yourself in areas of risk, that typically is
Lead
not what
climbing.
insurance is happy to, put their resources towards. And so he was like, "I'm gonna do it for you. Like pro bono,
Wow.
I want to help you accomplish this." So I sat with him at his office. I pulled up a video of Will Gadd, Canadian climber and just a legend in the alpine world. And I was like, "Here's Will, and watch him climb some ice. This is what ice climbing is. This is what I'm going to be learning how to do. Can you create that possibility for me?" And come up with that phrase, "can't, will, did." Like he did it. He did. Like,
Mm,
I can't ice climb. No, I will ice climb. Did it. And this is seventh or eighth season I'm heading into now where ice climbing is a big part of my world, and traveling for that, and, you know, becoming an alpinist and, doing it at like the semi pro level. And it's just been kind of a dream realized, and a dream that I didn't even dream until I was nearly 30, well, past 30, by the time I took intermediate. And so it's just incredible that you may not even know what dreams you're going to have in your life, and how precious is it to have a community that supports you and have people you
mm.
see that have gone before you. Like those are such magic elements into accomplishing your goals. It was almost like visual mentorship,
Mm.
someone coming alongside me saying, "I believe in you. You can do it." Sing Mo, and years now, like we've climbed together in Canada. Last year taught an ice clinic together at the Bozeman Ice Fest, to see how everything's kind of come full from that first conversation with Scott, where he was like, "We don't know if you can, but I think you're going to prove us wrong," is a big, big part of my story and why I keep moving along.
I love hearing of all these people along the way that have been champions and cheerleaders for you. How does it feel for you knowing that you are now that for other people?
Yeah, it's something where I'm like, "Okay, what's my lane? Like, where do I want to leave an impression? If I have the opportunity." I think we all have the opportunity in small areas. It starts with our family, our community, my classroom. Like, how do I want to be someone who can provoke, inspire? We hear all the time, but I love the word provoking because I feel like that really is a call to action. Because even though, you may not have a disability, if I'm provoking you, like, it may move you to action a bit more than inspiring. Like, that word has just kind of been so stretched to where I think we forget, like, I have a can't, will, did story in my life too. Not just me being impressed with this girl with one hand that, she became an alpinist, and that's amazing, but what's my own can't, will, did? And it's been really cool to see how that translates, into other people's view of themselves or their
Mm,
family. And I've gotten, messages, now that social media exists and we have platforms to, see people and their lives. It's kind of this visual diary that we get to interact with and we get to learn from it. I remember this mom messaging me and she's like, "You don't know me. I've just kind of followed you for a little bit. And I can't tell you enough how you give me hope." And she sent a
mm,
picture of her child in their crib, and their child was born with a limb difference. And she's like, "Hope. You gave me hope just living your life, posting your stories, because I just didn't know what was ahead for my kid, and I didn't know how to encourage them." And I think about my mom, and that was kind of her deal. She didn't have a lot of hope, so she wanted to put bubble wrap around me. Like, how do I make sure she's gonna have a good life? I still remember stories where she tells people, I saw her left hand and she had her ring finger. And I was like, "Oh, good. She can still get married. She can still wear a ring." 1986, different vibe, different
yeah.
times. And that was where she was like, "Oh, there's hope." But now my hope is this mom who sees me can think way beyond the scope of they'll still get married. But what can they accomplish in life that seems
Yeah.
impossible? And if that is the legacy that I just get to leave for my walk on this earth, like that's an honor. That's exciting.
Mm,
That motivates me. And what translates into the classroom when I'm with my students, sharing life in the outdoors, sharing mountaineering with these kids. It's been so fun and funny moments where they're like, "Girls don't climb." And you show them the it's me on the top of the mountain, your teacher. And then they're little boys are like, "You're a girl? What?" And you're like, "Yes, I am." And the stereotypes that are just filtering into their little brains. Hopefully, every year there's a generation of 5-year-olds coming out of Miss Cross's class that will know what the term prosthetic is, that will know about alpinism, that will know about limb differences, that will know nothing can hold you back, that both boys and girls can climb in the mountains. That's their space too. And disabled people can be in the mountains. At the end of each year, as starting to acquire friends from around the world that are professional athletes, thanks to those years of online teaching during COVID, I got really good at using Zoom. And so I think this year will be season 4 of, the kindergarten hot seat, where I kind of look at the group of kindergartners I have and I think, okay, who do I know that was from where they grew up or from where their family's from or looks like them? And then they get to come in on Zoom after we've watched a video of them or seen pictures of them come up with kindergarten questions that range from do you get scared in the mountains to how'd you learn to become a really good surfer to what's your favorite color? They just ask all the questions and the best ones are the off the cuff ones that I'm just like, sorry, these may be embarrassing or, they may just say anything to you, but that's because 'cause they're 5 and they don't have a filter, and it's just so fun for the kids, not just to see a female and a disabled person climbing, but they see that person looks like me
Mhm.
or that person came from the same country my family came from. That person has the same hair as me. And skiing to climbing to surfing to skateboarding and snowboarding. And it's been so fun to go like, okay, this is like a form of mentorship. This is a form of sharing my story and letting it permeate through the next generation that maybe it won't take them till they're in their 30s to see representation. They saw it in their kindergarten class in June at 5. But it's just so fun to be able to see how just living your story authentically and really never giving up on yourself can just be such a positive effect for other people and their own walk and their own story.
Yeah, not only are they learning your story, but you're also showing them other examples of people that are living their story in the same way that people did that to you. So you're just really giving them multiple gifts at once at such a young age, too. And that
Yeah.
can change the entire trajectory of their lives from
Yeah,
5.
I hope so, right? I wish I got into climbing before I was 30, but I really hope that something that they can take away from kindergarten and they remember that when they're grown up. I still remember my kindergarten teacher and some of my experiences. They mostly revolved around me like, cutting my hair and getting in trouble.
So, what's something that people get wrong about adaptive athletics or a big misconception?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think it goes back to, these assumptions of like, can you do that versus how do you do that? And
Mhm.
deficit thinking like you must not be able to lead. I've been at clinics where oh there's an adaptive clinic going on and I'm just saying hi but I'm heading over to do a multi-pitch route with a partner because we're training for an Alaska climb and at this clinic my friends were there and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just I'll tie in and run up a lap," and we had a guide that didn't know me like trying to coach me along, which they're getting paid to do that with that crew and it's an intro to ice. But they operated from this unconscious bias of this must be her first time. And I think
Assumption.
you can accidentally think adaptive climbers are always beginning climbers.
Mhm.
And it's not like the advice she was giving me was wrong, but it's also like, I'm going to climb and getting paid to be on this team, this brand that's on my kit. Like, I'm an athlete on their team right now. But to you, it's okay if you don't know me. But the fact that you thought this was like my first time on ice, like, would that necessarily be the case if someone else walked up?
Mhm. Like, why was that your immediate
in a
thought?
kit
Yeah.
and start climbing. And so just these kind of unconscious biases, which is again part of the human experience. We all operate within them towards the outside world. There's so much about, why we have unconscious biases and even the biology and the science and the, psychology behind it all, you can get into and study that. But I really noticed, oh man, like that's the first reaction, like, oh, they must be new.
Mhm.
And so I'm such a proponent, like, I can't wait to see clinics where it's not just the one adaptive clinic at an ice fest is intro to ice,
Yeah.
but it's like mixed climbing, lead climbing, and and getting the resources and getting people, wanting to be a part of it enough and feeling physically comfortable enough to get to that level. Like with my disability, it is a disability that a quick modification and prosthetic, and I'm climbing, and it's not as complicated, as some disabled ice climbing is, and the gear you need and the safety and whatnot. And so I know there's a spectrum that is bigger than sometimes we call them normies, clinic or climbers and their progression of learning. But I think
Mhm.
that's kind of what I stumble into is,
Yeah.
people assuming maybe that I'm not as skilled as I am because of that unconscious bias.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Even just from what I've experienced, as a woman in the sport is, similar that there can be limitations or people assuming, that you should just do an introductory course, for example, when it seems like there can sometimes be fewer options in terms of
Mhm.
availability, so I can imagine that being even more so in
Yeah.
adaptive athletics as well.
Yeah. And we have always as females or whatever our identity is, it's so easy for people to bring those stereotypes or those biases into how we question each other in the outdoors. And it completely can be unintentional. You don't
Mhm.
mean to think a person doesn't have skills, but it's still this knee jerk reaction. And I remember coming off a climb with two of my, girlfriends who are, full alpinists. And we came down, off a day climbing El Dorado, a classic in the North Cascades, not technical, but, a long push and, really steep approach. And, we get roped up, glacier all, but they're all skilled and they've done, climbs all over the world. And, they're both Asian women. And so we're coming down, it's the three of us, and this whole big team comes up and, there's guides, but the guy looks at me and he's like, "Oh, are you guiding?" At first, I go,
This is
"Oh, he thinks I look like a guide. Cool." I was like, "No, we're all climbing." And then, we keep walking by, and I was like, "Why does he think I was guiding?" And the girls are like, "Because we're Asian and we're
mm,
women." There's the unconscious bias that
yep,
it's us in the outdoors. Surely
mhm,
we can't be equals on a climb or leaders on
yep,
a climb. And that really opened my eyes for I was like, "My gosh, you're kidding."
yep,
And so there is a ways to go. And
mhm,
we mess up um in our, quick interactions. And I think it just takes thoughtfulness. And I don't think,
mhm,
that's a controversial request. It's thoughtfulness. And
yeah. I remember when I was kayak guiding in Alaska, and there were 2 other male guides and another female guide, and we would mix up the groups every day of which clients went with which guide, and it was quite often that I would have people in my group come up to me and ask, "Which one is my guide?" about the 2 male guides. Or if they
and
were in my group, they'd say, "Oh, can we go with him?" Or they would ask the male guide, making assumptions that
yeah.
for me as a woman or young woman that I automatically had less experience or less know-how than my peers, which
Hmm.
wasn't necessarily true. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it happens. It's very common and keep going
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, we keep going. There are new ways to continue to go, and this is why I think about showing my kindergartners you belong there and showing them and like breaking it down. The boys in my class, guess what? All the girls have a place there too. You're seeing a professional athlete that's a woman, a professional athlete that's a Hispanic woman, that's an Asian woman, that's a Ukrainian woman. Like the list can go on, for any background, any identity. And if these little boys and little girls are seeing that, I hope that if they got into climbing, they just wouldn't even second guess in those
Mhm.
areas that we still feel second guessed because there's enough generations where people like, no, we're pursuing thoughtfulness. We're pursuing breaking that unconscious biasness. And so that's maybe part of why I do this. That's going to be the outcome that I won't see, but maybe someone experiences in the outdoors in 30 years. Like, oh, I wasn't judged off a stereotype, or I wasn't judged off someone's biasness because they were raised or they saw that as a child and it didn't get
Mhm.
ingrained in them that like, this type of person isn't a guide, or this type of
Right.
person, can't lead XYZ. And
Mhm.
so fingers are crossed that that's the path we get to help forge. We're the forerunners still,
Mhm.
each generation gets to be a forerunner for, the next coming. So, and I think mentorship and that piece is so much a part of it, and the mentorship in my life and where it's brought me to a level of believing in myself. Um, I think is a significant part of why I didn't just stop at finishing the course, but I,
Mhm.
pushed on and it's like, I actually want this to be my career. I actually want to, be a sponsored athlete. I actually want to
Mhm.
balance that with my career as an educator and now balance that with, getting married and being a stepmom and balancing that with, being a public speaker and traveling for that. Like it all has blended, because I feel like I've been mentored
Mm.
by those that have gone before me and done it. And I just see the fruit of it and, in my own life and my confidence, but, really the story that I can share that hopefully is a catalyst for other people and, being able to do what they want to do.
And how do you balance all of that?
Well, I take my vitamins and
Drink your water.
I drink my water. Yeah, it's a lot of just being really structured, but I'm kind of a list person. And I think when you're a teacher, you're so ingrained into being a multitasker. And especially when you're in a room full of 5-year-olds that are learning how to human in addition to learning how to read. And so you have to be, really good at herding cats is what I like to say. And you have to be so organized so you're on top of it, like collecting the data of not forgetting about this email or that field trip or this and that and parents and kids. And so my career for the past 17 years has been how do I multitask in one room 6 hours a day and survive enough and feel successful enough to want to go back the next day and do it again. And especially when sometimes I feel like this is the only career where you can get, physically and verbally assaulted and everyone's just like, see you tomorrow. They're 5, so, that's a whole nother podcast. But I feel like that has really enabled me to spread myself thin, but still feel like my cup is full.
Yeah.
And the mountains have been such a place where there's that term decompressing. And so I come home from work and I definitely need to decompress, sometimes in silence, sometimes on a run. But the weekends or my breaks, summers off, winter break, midwinter break, spring break, holiday weekends, I have found when I get to go do something in the mountains that pushes my skills as a climber, when I get to go do something physically challenging, it's such a boost of energy and health, even though I'm breaking down my body and I'm tired, where I go back into the classroom during the week. And that's where I'm using a lot of my mental capacity. And so it's kind of this like on and off, this yin and yang
Mm.
to me feeling full, really having my mental capacity at overload and then my physical capacity at overload. And I think being successful, I have an amazingly supportive husband, his boys, 2 teenagers. They're growing up so fast and they've been really fun to kind of learn how do I support parent, bonus parent, and how do I encourage them in what they want to do. And of course, she's scoring us free gear and that's sick. Whatever I can get them, to want to hang out with me. I'm like, here's a new pair of ski socks from my sponsor. They love skiing. And so I think just I love being on top of things and organized and list making. And so the balancing part, it just comes from being super afraid of ever getting behind because I feel like if I ever got behind it all, the house of cards will
It will
crumble.
fall. It's a good lesson for everyone. Stay
And
super organized, balance your time. You do
yeah.
things
And
on
then
your own and with your family.
and marriage is not easy. And we're working on the communication piece and the assumption. I didn't communicate that to you. But in my head, I understood it, but then you understood it this way, and it's been so fun. I always felt like if I ever got married. My mom had the grandiose goals in 1986. She has her finger where the ring traditionally
You
goes
gotta put
on
a
and,
ring on it.
in our culture, so life will be good for her, and wow, I sure showed her not getting married till my late 30s, where I was like, "Is it gonna happen?" Who knows? But to finally find a partner where something that I'm so proud of them is their emotional intelligence, their ability to want to have those hard conversations or kind of iron sharpening iron. I'd always heard of this phrase like a good friend, a good partner is someone who can sharpen you like iron sharpens iron. And I think that's the way that I'm able to have these three in one careers, kindergarten teacher, public speaker, alpinist, where it's like I'm getting paid to do the 3 things that I love, that I'm excelling at, and I have a partner who wants to help get me to my dreams, but at the same time is, like, helping me be a better communicator, helping me see where my flaws are and where, trauma from a childhood and how I communicate, like, it's been so full and not easy because you my time is not my own when I get home. Let's do dinner together. Let's not. Tomorrow night, right after school, I'm going to do a public speaking event in Seattle. And so it's just this really fun partnership where
Mhm.
I'm learning how to be a better communicator. And I hope that really helps me be a better partner in the mountains, even to communicate my needs and my worries and my fears, and not just try to like stay so strong and keep it together. But like, there's beauty in making mistakes. There's beauty in sharing your vulnerabilities. I think that's something when I had my specific mentor, Kit Delorier. She's an incredible athlete. Look her up, legend. And a big part of her mentoring me, not just teaching me how to create keynote presentations for public speaking, something she has done a lot in her career as skier, ski mountaineer, an athlete for the North Face, but she also really was helping me learn how to communicate with partners and the importance of that in the mountains. Also, she had 2 teenage daughters, and I was like, "I'm getting married to this man with 2 teenage boys, and how do you mother?" And, there was that aspect too that she really mentored me on. Just learn from other people
Mhm.
and even in that same realm of the representation piece, like who has gone before me and has been able to juggle all of this. And, I watched Kit do it all. The first person to ski off all 7 summits, and she had 2 kids after, and she stayed an athlete, and she travels for public speaking, and she raises daughters, and, she was focused on being a wife, like, how do you do all that? And the fact that I was able to have a mentorship at that time in my life where I was now going to balance the family aspect, not just the career as a female athlete, I think really helped evolve my journey in the last couple of years and stay successful and stay where this is still filling me up and this is still feeling doable and I'm not feeling burnt out. My needs are being met. I'm learning how to communicate my needs.
Yeah,
So,
finding the balance between all of the things that are so important in your life
yeah,
and making
so
sure that it still feels good so that you continue on the path and that you don't feel the need to remove something.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the ebb and flow, and I'm getting older, and so sometimes injuries are a bit more, um, in the recovery than I, had experience when I was in my 20s doing this, and so it's also learning how do you rest and recover, and,
Mhm.
the older you get, you realize I have all these identities, but if one should hit pause, will that unravel my entire world? Or what do I truly hold my core identity in? And can I give myself the grace and the freedom to pause, take care of myself, to continue on? And this aspect of, my career now, we're not where yearly I'm doing expeditions and I have grandiose goals of climbing routes in Alaska and beyond, and I have my sights set on Pakistan and the Himalayas where it's like, how far can I go as a female alpinist, as a
Mhm.
disabled athlete? And what is that gonna take? And all the years of prepping, for expeditions and the planning and packing and planning. And again, I'm like, oof, being a teacher with that list making, like that has really helped when it's come time to go into expedition mode. But
Yeah.
yeah, it all comes full circle. It's like doesn't matter if it's an expedition or just meal prepping for the week. It's all an act of like what feels true to yourself. What routine have I put myself in where I'm not shaken should an injury stop me, or I'm not shaken should these things happen to me during the week. And I really feel that's been because of a community. It's because of a mentorship, because of a healthy partner, that I'm able to
Mhm.
stay afloat in this chaotic existence at times.
I wanted to ask you about your spring break plan. Is that the 3rd attempt in the Alaska
Yeah,
Range on
yeah.
Moose's Tooth?
But third time's the charm, is that what they say?
Yep.
Yeah, the last 2 seasons, obviously, season 1, I got injured, and we had to retreat off the route on the Moose's to ham and eggs. We got over halfway, and the injury was too much, the frozen prosthetic, and last season, it was so much snow and the avalanche danger was super high,
Mm,
watching avalanches break and then just digging ourselves out of snowed-in tents and kitchen. That was a whole new experience. Okay, we can't climb. Now we just need to survive and be comfortable on this glacier until the weather changes and we can get rescued, get our
yeah.
flight out of here. Then this season, my partner and I who are going out there, we'll be really watching the weather and kind of shifting from spring break to, teacher's gonna save up her personal days. I have an amazing sub. This attempt, I'll try not to be the season opener on the route, but just wait for, better weather window. Let a couple other teams, those early weeks, clear out the
Mhm.
anchors from the snow from the winter. I mean, it's still going to be the same level of dedication and focus. I'm hoping going to a place where weather's on my side, my shoulder's fully healed, have little modifications to the prosthetic where we are putting this Velcroed cap over my release button so it doesn't get frozen pushed in. So I'm
Mm.
not coming out of it mid climb, hanging 1,500 feet above a glacier.
Oh,
That would be my hope. That was a fun experience that I never
are
wanna
you
have again.
are you approaching it differently mentally at all?
A little bit in the sense of I need to remember that there's this quote. So, uh there's an athlete on the North Face team. Her Instagram's Chrissy Lusty. I believe her last name is Lustenberger. But Chrissy's this incredible skier alpinist, and she and a partner just skied Mount Robson down this face for the first time, and it's incredible to see what is happening at that level. And she was sitting and getting interviewed about the climb, and this thing that she said, because 'cause they're, "How'd you do it? Like, what did it take?" And she's like, "Took a lot of years of waiting for the right weather, waiting for the stars to align," kind of, and she's like, "Tenacity and patience, like, that's what it takes. It's a process. It's not all about going there and doing it." And I'm realizing, like, this has been such a process, and I want tenacity in it, and I want that grit and that drive, I'm gonna keep pushing, that can't, will, did attitude, but realizing like it's patience. Like this is a process. And even though I didn't get all the way through it, trip one, didn't even get on it, trip two, it's a process. What have I learned during this entire time? I learned patience. I learned perseverance. And I learned my can't, will, did story. It's not linear. Oh, I'm at the did forever. But I learned in Alaska, of all places, on that root canal glacier, I learned I'm going to go back to can't sometimes in my life. And in this specific area, climbing ham and eggs, climbing this route, I'm back at can't. Maybe I can't climb in Alaska. Maybe it's just too cold for a person with a disability. And my partners on the climb, that first trip, they were just like, you're the forerunner that you looked for growing up. This will be the first time a disabled person with a upper limb difference and a prosthetic leading on ice does this. Like no one knew what would happen to the release button, and you're gonna create a modification and an adaptation to that issue. And I did. And so now I feel like last year I didn't get to test out the modification. And this year I feel like, okay, with the better weather window, I'm so set on pursuing that process again that I think that is what is really motivating me. Like the summit is always going to be there.
Mm.
And honestly, a healthy mountaineer, a healthy climber, when their mindset is the one thing that matters is coming home,
Yeah.
I think that is when you have a healthy climber, a healthy partner. That's my risk tolerance is do as much as I can, the right choices, my decision making. My risk tolerance changes the more experienced you get, but realizing that luck jar, that experience jar, you're pulling from your luck into the experience. And one day maybe the luck jar is empty. And so just trying to be discerning and smart and realize summit is not mandatory. Coming home is
Yeah.
mandatory for
The
me.
summit is nice.
It's nice, right? I wanna stand on it? I know there's service at the top. Do I wanna take a picture, throw it up on the gram,
Of
or
course.
quickly text my husband and be like, "I'm on the summit, halfway there," because it is only halfway, and 80% of mountaineering accidents are on the descent.
Mhm.
So, do I wanna get there 110%? But I've learned, man, the tenacity and the patience, what I've learned in the process, that goes with me forever, whether or not I step on the summit this April. But I sure hope I do.
Yeah. I'm gonna be rooting for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And, like you said, to hear what you learned throughout the process.
Yeah.
You're continuing this journey and you're making modifications and you're learning and you're going to pass that knowledge on to the next person that is looking up to you and looking at you.
Yeah. That's
What
my
is
hope.
a yeah. What is a piece of advice that you would give to someone that might not see themselves in the outdoors? What would you tell them?
I think there's this phrase that I heard in my 20s, if you don't quit, you win. And realizing like so much of a mental block about a fear, because I grew up with fear. Like I feared showing my hand to people. I feared reaching out and shaking, and it's my right hand. And so, culturally we shake with our right hands. And I would just kind of awkwardly turn my left hand around and I'm like, oh, that awkward experience of them, what is she doing with her hand, is way less traumatic than me just reaching out with my stump and seeing what happens. And I just remember I was so wrapped up in I can't do these things or I don't want to be my authentic self because I care so much about what other people think. Realizing actually they're not thinking about me as much as I'm thinking about me. And that's true for everyone. We live in our own heads rent free sometimes, thinking we're in everyone else's head. And that can be such an inhibitor to doing what we really want to do. What will people think about me? And I see that in our youngest. He can get so concerned on other people's perception of him, what he wears, what he's into, how good he's doing in school. And been starting to see conversations from educators and psychologists saying there is this thing happening in this next generation where they're so afraid of looking cringe, so afraid of being successful in school or pursuing a passion that maybe the people around them aren't thinking it's cool. And I just would encourage people, pursue your passion. Do not let fear of man get in your way. Like human. Don't let that fear step between you and what you think you could be good at or what you truly feel like you love. And if you don't quit, you win. And even if I don't get on that summit, I didn't quit this whole journey. And so I know I win. And the finish line may look different than what I had planned, but I never even planned on becoming an alpinist in my teens or my most of my 20s. And so I just know that that's such a true phrase and it transcends not just the outdoor world, but really is any sphere of passion that we may have. So I think
The
that
ul
is the advice I would want to bestow. Is you don't quit, then don't let fear
yeah,
of
it's
man let you quit.
really the ultimate freedom to let go of the expectations or the perceived limitations that we put on ourselves, and when we can release that, we can actually meet our potential.
Yeah. Yeah. I look back and I remember a friend commenting Instagram came out with like stories for the first time. And I remember posting a video and my hand was in it. My visually I was showing my stump. And a friend texted me. She's like, "Oh my gosh, you posted a video of you with your hand. You didn't hide it." I don't have pictures of me from probably 10 on where you see my hand. It's always hidden in some way. I let that cloud my entire identity for so long. And she was like, "You're not afraid anymore. You're showing your hand in your video." And I just think of how amazing that is now that there's nothing that I feel self hatred about in the way that I felt it in my teens and my 20s. And I so wish I could pull young Kimber out of that self hatred, out of that doubt, out of that hiding because what I've been able to accomplish, like not hiding anything, being my authentic self. I'm not afraid to show my hand. I even maybe 7 years ago now. And so in my 30s, still feeling bold and brave. And I'm not afraid of having one hand and people knowing. And, I'm shaking hands with my right stump, not afraid. And this one man, there's kiosks in the middle of the malls and they try to sell you a hair straightener or perfume or whatever. And he reaches out his hand to shake my hand. And I just give him my right hand, like, here's my stump, in my head. And he audibly yelled and jumped back. And you're like, whoa, oh, there's the one thing that I was afraid of my entire life happening. Someone making a big deal and being scared of me. It happened. But because I had fought off that self hatred for so long and said, no, I'm going to walk in the opposite spirit. I'm going to walk in truth. I was able to see him through the lens of he just hasn't had enough background knowledge in that he hasn't
Mhm.
had enough exposure. I'm not mad at him. I don't think he's awful. He was very, I'm sorry, like when he came to realize, like, ooh, that's such a faux pas for me to make a big deal out of your hand. That says more about him than it does me. But it just says, like, he hasn't seen enough representation. And I think that's part of why I'm like, I don't want to hide anymore because I
Mhm.
don't want the next generation to feel like if I reach my hand out, someone's going to scream and freak out and I'm going to feel awful. Cause yeah, it doesn't feel good. But so much work had been done in my heart to where I saw that man not through the eyes of
Mm.
anger or disgust. How dare you? I'm so offended.
Yeah.
But it was, man, this I missed out on opportunities to see diversity in
Yeah.
limbs, let alone just diversity in culture and people groups.
It sounds beyond self-acceptance and actually self-confidence.
Yeah,
Like, to fully come around the corner. You're not just okay with who you are, you're proud of who you are, and that is
yeah,
another gift to give that mirror to anyone, especially the children that you work with, your family
mhm,
members, your children. Not
yeah,
just being okay with yourself, being confident in your full being.
that's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been such a pleasure to learn more about your story, and I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm just so excited to hear more from the people that you're provoking. I can't wait to hear about the stories that people tell, and you are a piece of their puzzle, like the
Oh,
people that were a piece of yours.
yes, that just enriches my own experience. If I think it through that lens, it's the fire underneath, like, oh, that's my motivation.
Think of the kids that are gonna come to you in 20 years when they're, adults and they say, "I did this because of you." Whatever that thing
Oh,
is, whatever passion they discover in their life.
yeah, I hope that's the dream.
Yeah. Oh, so cool. Thank you, Kimber. I can't wait to also hear about how Moose's Tooth goes. I'm gonna be eagerly following along.
Yes, I will let you
Yes,
know.
awesome. Maybe we'll see you in Alaska. We'll be out there in June.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's so pretty out there. I
Yeah,
love it.
we had, actually attempted Denali in '23, and we got turned around by weather at 17, so,
Mhm.
yeah, I relate to it's a process, but
Man, it
and we
is a
have a
process.
nine-month-old, so my partner is actually going again on Denali with
Really.
another one of our climbing partners and friends, so I'm gonna sit this one out, and it's hard to do. It is really hard to do.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe that. Maybe there's a chance down the line,
Yeah.
that a lot of people are like, "Oh, you wanna do Everest? Do you wanna do Denali?" And it's just a whole other world of waiting,
The
you
the
know?
weather windows out there are
Yeah,
really tough. You don't know what to expect, and it can look a certain way. It can look great for 3 days, and then it changes while you decide to make the approach. So,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's a long period. I mean, Denali is 3 weeks.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
well, it's good you have summer breaks, but it might not always match up what
Oh,
a
for
good weather
sure. I
window
mean, some
is.
days I think this Moose's Tooth trip, you're there kind of just for a week. I have only been there for weeks at a time, coinciding with my spring break, and, man, by that last day, you're like, "Oh, I am ready to not have to pull down 5 layers to pee in a bucket in a big hole in the snow."
The pee hole just gets bigger and bigger.
I know.
You're like, "I
And
don't wanna
deeper and
fall in."
deeper. Yeah, no joke. Ugh. I just have so much respect for people that have even attempted Denali. It's a huge thing. So well done on that attempt, and we'll see what the future holds. But
There will be more.
yes,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah.
there.
Well, thanks again. I'm so excited to share more of your story with the world. Thank you so much for listening to this episode with Kimber Cross. I'm still thinking about so many pieces of her story. Early mornings on the river with her dad, years of hiding her hand, the moment she saw another climber with a limb difference and realized, I will do this, and how that turned into a custom ice tool, big Alaskan objectives, and a life built around the phrase, if you don't quit, you win. I also love the way she talked about being a forerunner, how her presence in the mountains, in the classroom, and online becomes a kind of visual mentorship for the kids and adults who don't yet see themselves represented. And that reminder that the summit is optional, but coming home and continuing to tell the story is mandatory. If Kimber's journey resonated with you, or if you thought of someone who needs to hear this, it would mean a lot if you shared this episode with a friend, left a rating or review, or sent me a note about your own can't, will, did story. I'll link Kimber's work and ways to follow along with her Moose's Tooth attempt in the show notes. I'm Gabriella, and this is Women in Wild Places. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you out there.